Okay, we're recording.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Pullman Police Advisory Meeting. I am Stephanie Ring, Chair of the committee. I hope all of you are healthy, had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and are excited to celebrate the many holidays upon us and upcoming anniversary end of 2020. Hope for a better new year. So Darby will take attendance for our committee members. Please be sure your name is clearly visible or send Darby an email that you are in attendance. Our next item is our approval of minutes, but Darby, do we have a quorum? No, we do not. So we can skip that for now. All right, so next we have Rocky Lucas joining us today. Rocky has applied to be on the committee. Chief Jenkins and I met with Rocky last week, and it was a pleasure getting to know Rocky and the contributions that he'd bring forward. Rocky, at this time, I would like to give you the floor for about 5 minutes to brief the committee on why you are interested in being a member, what contributions do you bring forward, and entertain any questions that a committee member may have for you. Then Chief Jenkins will invite you to the virtual waiting room briefly while we discuss your application, and at that point you'll be invited back to the meeting where you'll learn if you have been voted on as a member, which at that point you will hopefully stay for the remainder of the meeting.
That sounds good to me, so I'll go ahead and get started.
Wonderful.
Alrighty, so I will just take a chance to introduce myself to the larger group. My name is Rocky Lucas. I am a clinical social worker, and I'm a faculty at the College of Veterinary Medicine at Washington State University. My primary job role is as a mental health therapist to the students in the School of Vet Med. I also am a guest lecturer and come up with various programming. I am not as new to the area as I think I am. Like, I came here in January, so I'm coming upon 1 year here, although the pandemic has kind of just made time seem kind of strange. So I'm still new in the sense of haven't gotten to do a whole lot of socializing, but one of the reasons why I want to be a part of this advisory board is because of being a social worker. I have an extensive working experience with law enforcement, and the values of social work and law enforcement sometimes come together, sometimes they collide, but in any event, it's always a really good conversation to have about how our professions can work together. The very first job that I ever had as like a full-on professional out of college was as a child protective worker. You know, what you would expect, I would go to people's houses late at night sometimes and remove their children and take them to foster care, kind of those serious abuse situations. And I had a very close working relationship with law enforcement at that time, a very positive working relationship with law enforcement. Certainly there were times where our differing educations and worldviews and theories would come into play. It was noticeable, but ultimately I could not do my job effectively without them, and they could not really do their job effectively without me. So that was a really positive working relationship that I had. At my last job in Charleston, West Virginia, I worked at a doctor's office in the capital city, which really had an outreach focus. And part of that outreach focus was on substance abuse, very serious opioid use disorder in West Virginia. And we would try to extend out programs that would give out Narcan, which is a reversal agent, that would be a harm reduction program, giving clean needles so that they wouldn't get Hep C and HIV from their drug use. And that was a different kind of working relationship than I'd had before. In some ways, that relationship was at times even combative with the law enforcement. And so oftentimes all sides were frustrated. Everyone kind of felt like the other side was getting in the way of them doing their job. And so what I discovered through that was the importance of really understanding everyone's viewpoints and coming to the places where there was agreement. So ultimately, for us to be able to do our job, we had to at least have law enforcement understanding what we were doing, why we were doing it, and what steps we would take so that it wouldn't disrupt the work that they were otherwise trying to do. And so they discovered that if they would kind of, okay, that's not 100% what we want, but if we're willing to do this, then this, tampers down a lot of arguments and a lot of drama and a lot of controversy, which would otherwise get in the way of what everyone was trying to do. So I can't say it was the biggest success story, and I don't know if I would have had the emotional energy to do this kind of work there. But one of the first things I noticed when I came to Pullman was just the level of integration among all the really stakeholders in this community. I'm a part of several various service organizations and committees at Washington State, and pretty much each one of them has involvement from either the campus police department or the Pullman PD. Several of the town halls that I've been to, several of the city-related Zoom calls that I've been to have representatives from both the university and the Pullman Police Department. And so it was kind of a hint to me early on, wow, they really do like to work together. Like they put it into action. It's not just words. And so I began to think then this is something that I could really be a part of. And I think one of the skills that I bring to the table historically is that liaison role, is the fact that, I understand that sometimes to be able to implement adequate programs, to be able to make a difference and have more people than not buy into something, then you have to really understand everyone's viewpoint. You have to take the time to understand it and not dismiss it. And then be able to say, okay, here's where we are in agreement. Because you'll always be able to find things you don't agree on. And if you focus on that, then everyone's just going to be combative and nothing's going to get done. So I think I have that. Being a counselor, it kind of comes with the territory of being able to listen and being able to strategize and being able to take in sometimes multiple stakeholders' arguments into play and find a compromise there. So that in a nutshell is the reason why I want to be a part of this advisory board. And then too, just from a personal perspective, when I first moved out here, I was going to be Mr. Sociable. I was going to, meet all the friends on campus and go on dates and enjoy the life here. And the pandemic's kind of, put a little bit of a crunch on that. And so, but then I was like, I still need to find a way to connect with the community. I still need to find a way to serve the community, even if we're still working from home, even if I can't go up and give people hugs all the time. And so I see this as a way that I can contribute what I have to offer. Working from home, I have the emotional and just time to be able to take on extra projects and really devote myself to work outside of just my 8 to 4:30 job. And then a few months from now, when we're all vaccinated up and like everything's back to normal again in the universe, then I'll look forward to seeing all you guys in person, meeting in person, and all that. So.
Well, thank you, Rocky, very much. Are there any questions for Rocky? No, okay. Well, I'm going to let Chief Jenkins excuse you to our virtual waiting room.
Okay.
And we will call you back momentarily.
Awesome, thank you.
So Rocky, did you get a little invitation pop up to a breakout room?
I didn't actually.
All right. Look, yeah. Still nothing?
Mm-mm.
Alrighty.
I could leave and then just like pop back in 5 minutes.
That's all right. Darby, have you done this before on our meeting?
The breakout rooms?
Yeah, let me.
No, and I don't see any options
make you a
anywhere.
co-host here, and I show him assigned to a breakout room 1, but I don't see a way for me to manually move him.
You just pop them to a waiting room instead of a breakout room?
Well, that's what they call them in the system we use.
I'm gonna try something. We'll see if this
Okay.
Ah,
Hey,
he
all
disappeared.
right.
Do we want to pause recording?
That we do.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations, Rocky, and welcome to the committee.
Yay.
Yay. You now have lots of friends.
Perfect. Awesome.
So
Thank you guys so
when
much.
we
I really
ring
appreciate it.
in, yeah, when we ring in the 2021 year and everything goes away and we just push 2020 to our past memory, we will all come together and celebrate at some point.
Yes, big party.
Congratulations.
Thank you guys very much.
So our next item of our business is just a brief recap of the Reimagining Public Safety in Pullman Summit. So I will just briefly recap, and then anyone who was on the subcommittee can chime in as well. We had over 100 individuals attend the meeting. Not as many stayed for the breakout sessions, but overall it's a huge success. And the subcommittee should really be proud of yourselves for all the effort to bring forth this summit and provide a safe and educational space for our community. Chief Jenkins and Chief Gardner provided an excellent presentation on their respective agencies. The breakout sessions were wonderful from what that we know. There are several of us that did not attend the breakout sessions. We stayed in the main room, but they provided 5 pages of detailed discussion, issues, concerns, solutions, and our survey, though we did have a very low response rate, but provided really great feedback on the summit itself. Great kudos to all of our breakout room moderators. And they also provided some additional comments about changes and concerns for our community. Chief Jenkins, Chief Gardner, and I will be meeting tomorrow to review the documents. The subcommittee will meet in early January. The date hasn't been set, but we'll be setting that very quickly. We'll be discussing the documents, the chief's priorities, and the next steps, and with the subcommittee. And then in February, we will report back to the entire Police Advisory Committee and the public who would like to come. And throughout the year, we will continue with the progress reports during our monthly meetings and posting them on our website. Any other subcommittee member wish to share their thoughts, or anyone who attended also, please feel free to share their thoughts.
I think you thanked everyone, but we haven't formally thanked you for chairing that subcommittee. So thank you for doing it, because there was a lot of work and a lot of editing and reviews and asking us for feedback and edits, and we would do that, and then it was changed like it felt like in a matter of minutes. So thank you for that.
It was my pleasure.
Good point, David. Thank you.
But besides thanking me, but thank you, any comments or any feedback, anything, and especially going forward, because we don't want the conversation to end at that time. So we will report back in February on next steps and priorities, but anybody wish to say anything? That's
So
right.
you guys are going to meet. Wait, hold on. No. I'm not fast today. So you guys are going to all meet together, and then you guys are going to prioritize and decide. And then does the subcommittee get to kind of weigh in on that, or are you kind of like, nope, we decided and we're moving forward? Or is there another chance for us to kind of say, well, what about this?
So the 2 chiefs and I are discussing tomorrow, just so I can get an understanding from them. Then we will go to the subcommittee to discuss and come up with priorities and next steps.
All right, thank you so much. Sorry I missed that.
No, that's right.
And is that in January again, Stephanie?
Yeah, I have to schedule that meeting, but it will be in early January.
But then the next steps meeting is in February at this meeting, right?
Yes, in
Okay,
which we will
thank you.
discuss all the next steps and coming up. All right, if there's nothing else, we will continue with our agenda, and that is the grant opportunities discussion. So I will turn the floor over to Dr. Macon.
Do you all see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So very briefly, I just wanted to thinking about what both the chiefs are doing, the subcommittees, and then, of course, just kind of, what our goal is from the summit. And yes, I realize I just moved this, so now I have to resume share. There we go. I have 3 screens, I apologize. I like to have it at least front and center, so I'm not staring over here as I'm talking. So this is really just a very brief overview. And kind of the first thing I want to do is just get a snapshot. So Darby and Chief Jenkins were really helpful in just putting together, what their grants applications have looked like over the past several years. And so all I did is I built from that data and just want to put together 2 quick graphics to just give the committee and give the residents just an idea of what external funding requests look like for the Pullman Police Department, where they've been successful, where they have not been. And we'll talk a little bit about what kind of contextually reflects these data, some of the initiatives that we've been working towards, and then really trying to kind of, the spirit behind all this is to generate a conversation among those of us here today, and certainly those reviewing this, on what the next steps are. Just again, to kind of create a baseline, talk about some of the different avenues towards resources, and then again, really just thinking through as we developed out that targeted list of what our initiatives and priorities should be going in to 2021. We just all kind of have this kind of in the back of our minds, if you will. So this is just kind of an overall breakdown. You'll notice that we've had more no's than yeses, and that's actually very common. But you'll notice also that in terms of the yeses, there's a wide degree of variability in where Pullman has been successful in getting these funds from. And so this is kind of just a snapshot of that. When we look over the years, so this is just breaking down, was it funded or not, looking at, from 2010 moving forward. And by and large, thinking about the prior and looking at this, there's success. I think the Pullman Police Department really does excel at targeting operational funds. You can see this, and for those interested, we have this broken down. I should say that Darby and the Chief broke this down very well in terms of where those funding applications were made, how long they were funded, what they covered. And by and large, it really is about operational, and that means that they are maximizing when there are funds available that you need to meet the criteria for, and they're not as competitive. The Pullman Police Department really does excel at going after those funds. And really it is about supplementing their operational funds, given the fact that we know that the Pullman Police Department, as with many police departments and many social service departments, are underfunded. You'll notice that in the no column, there are some larger requests that have been made in there. We have not had as much success, and I think this is kind of twofold. One is thinking about new positions, which are very difficult to be able to have external funding for those. There's kind of a hard set rule where you really don't want to use soft money for permanent hires. That creates a tremendous amount of issues for an organization. And then thinking through some of the initiatives, the COPS office, thinking about different technologies and different trainings that we could evaluate. So we kind of have a split focus in that regard. So I guess one kind of contextual point that I think sometimes people aren't as well, or particularly in the community, is the reality that it's not just that research budgets are declining, it's that when you think about smaller agencies, they just don't have a budget for research. What they have is the ability to ask a officer or a member of the staff to go out and conduct background research, or it falls on the chief or their administrative assistant to really background the grant, find the grant, write the application, manage the entire process, because the organization really doesn't have those resources. I think that the Pullman Police Department has been very collaborative. I know that I've worked with them and others have worked with them on trying to really standardize and be more strategic in how we target grants. Now, while all this is being said, there's two very specific points that I think the community needs to be mindful of, is that while there's more funding agencies and you're seeing that growth, there is an increasing number of applications, and those applying for these are also private research groups. And so they have a vested interest in learning how to write, to target, because that's what their business depends upon. If they're not bringing in grant monies, then they're not paying their bills for their staff, right? They are soft-funded organizations, and they are increasingly, particularly in criminal justice, taking up a very large portion of the funds in that area, which of course leaves limited funds for smaller agencies, and smaller agencies are not as competitive because they have smaller volumes of cases and clients, resources to be able to support the grant. So there's a variety of reasons that we can certainly talk to, kind of the question and answer, just having a conversation here around how to better position the Pullman Police Department and certainly other local agencies as well. So generally speaking, you kind of break down funding across these levels. And so I think oftentimes we think of local, this is really about local organizations, right? So sometimes the city may have particular funds available, but we're thinking about external funding. So really not about what the city makes available, but local organizations, local agencies. And we've seen those over the years where we've had local community organizations that have a small amount of funds that are available. Professional organizations, particularly in policing, there are many of them, and they provide a reasonable amount of funds, again, often targeted at larger and medium-sized agencies. But you're also seeing smaller organizations be more successful, as policing as a whole really does recognize that agencies the size of Pullman are actually more of your average agencies. This is about what they look like, 30 to 50 officers serving communities of about our size. So professional organizations, they do have funds available. One example might be the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, IACP. Of course, at the state, this isn't, we have state funding, but think about state agencies. And so you'll notice on that graph before, we had like the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission would be an example of a state agency providing funds. And of course, federal, most people are familiar with the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Justice, in violence against women, grant funding, Department of Justice, I should say, Violence Against Women Act, which has funds available specifically for police departments to be able to access for operational and purely research-based funding structures. And then private entities are increasing. I think most people are familiar with like the Arnold Ventures and other similar groups. The National Police Foundation would be an example of a private entity. They're also a professional organization, so it's kind of dualistic in that regard. So there are a myriad of different pathways to external funding. It's really a matter of thinking through, what is, the goal? Does it really fit within what we're trying to do with our ideas, and does it align? So I guess one of the things that we need to be mindful of as we're thinking about the strategies is really looking at what's going to require funding and what is not. Right? And I think that as we meet as a subcommittee, as we bring this back to the larger PAC, is, and certainly engage the community, is really being, kind of putting a little bit of forethought into, is this going to require external funds? If so, what do we know about NIH priorities or NIJ priorities or the community policing office? What do we know about what they're interested in funding? Do we know who the program manager is for that portfolio? Do we know their name? Do we have an email address? Do we have potentially a phone number so that we can pick up that phone and ask those questions? And I think this is, something that as a committee, we need to be very mindful that we need to start developing that internal capacity now. I think again, I think Chief Jenkins and Darby and everyone else has done a great job in that regard. They've been, as you saw, they've been successful, right? But we also need to be mindful of, what's going to be required, and do we have some of those write-ups available? Do we have some analysis of very basic data? And I think that some of that is in the annual report that we could easily pull into a grant application. Writing needs statements, identifying key questions. If we can start to develop and target people who have those skills among the PAC, then it just better positions us to move forward. When we see these types of applications, we notice that it aligns perfectly with what we want to do, is that we can target it and we can be very efficient and effective in our submissions. You often, you get 2 to sometimes 3 months. I think Chief Jenkins and I applied when we had 1 month to turn an entire grant application around. If we actually were developing just some of those key sections, which, they're going to need to be modified and adjusted to meet the needs of the RFP, but we could start developing those now. We could have them available. We could already know and go, oh, we need to write a little bit about, community needs in terms of housing. A little bit of information here. Hey, Krista. Hey, Rocky, could you help with that? Right? Tag team it as West Virginians, right? And then we can have this whole thing kind of put together for us. Right? That if we can think through the capacity of all of the great expertise that's here, we can use that to really become much more competitive in these applications. So I guess one of the things to kind of summarize, and I'm happy to come back and spend a lot more time working through how do you write successful grant applications, but really it really comes down to 4 points. And it really is, what's the problem specific to your community? I think we oftentimes will talk about the nature of the problem and we'll ground it in terms of kind of national or state level issues. You need to think local, right? So what do we know about the nature of the problem in Pullman or in Whitman County? And we're always kind of targeting around them. We're talking about our deficiencies and how we're going to overcome them. It's really about, looking through, do you have baseline data measures? What is good? What's a good measure? What do you know is kind of a clean data point that's not going to be messy, that you have archival data for, right? You have a kind of longitudinal data for it. It's being able to look at what would we need to collect for this? Could we collect it given our current resource constraints? The aims, really it's about 3. 3 aims that are not dependent, right? It's not like if we do this one, then we get to do this next one. They really got to be 3 independent aims that connect back to what is it that we want to do, right? And that'll come out of, this process where we, the Stephanie meets with the chiefs and the subcommittee looks at it, and we bring it to the PAC. And we go through, what are our priorities? What do we want to be able to accomplish? Does it require funds? If the answer is yes, well, what are we going to use these funds for? What are we going to be able to answer? And fundamentally, probably the hardest thing for people to kind of write, at least I know for me, I struggle with this, is it's the why does it matter, right? Like we can talk about, as an example, Chief Jenkins really wants a Citizen Police Academy. It's like one of the first things when I met with the chief, and I was a grad student, I was a doctoral student, and we talked, and he just lit up about, this is what I want. Like one day I want to have this. We just haven't been able to find funds for it. It looks like we might have the COPS office grant, the next iteration in 2021 might be perfectly matched for it. The question that we have to be thinking about is why does it matter? Why would a Citizen Police Academy matter? What is it actually going to accomplish? Right? So us being able to think that through, if we implement this, what could it accomplish? Right? How can we evaluate the success of it? How is it going to speak to our short-term and our long-term goals in our community? Why does it matter? I think we can articulate all the really, and Chief Jenkins can speak about his passion behind this. It's really important, and he can tell you all these reasons, but it's why does it matter, right? People have done these for decades. why are we trying to propose something slightly different? What's the nuance for us, right? Why does it matter for us? And I think that we need to, again, start having that in the kind of the back of the mind when we start talking about initiatives, we talk about different programs and interventions that we'd like to do. We always go back to, why is this important? Why does it matter? And again, and always bringing it back, always back to the local community. Like, why is this really going to help us? So when we do our background, we need to think about what are our goals and objectives, right? We're going to get that out of that, out of the subcommittee and the kind of the wish list, if you will. But it doesn't just stop there. When we have people come in and they do really great presentations for us, and they talk about what they do and what they foresee and their role and all these great ideas. I'm thinking about when we had the school resource officer come in and really talk about some of what he envisioned for for Pullman. We want to be able to think through, okay, what's the goal for that? What's the objective? Can we measure it? And always going back and thinking about what can we measure, be it quantitative or qualitative. Thinking through what preliminary data do we have beyond just what the Pullman Police Department collects, but there are other groups and organizations and at WSU and the community organizations that collect data, right? Well, who are they? What do they collect? Really thinking through what data is available to us that would be able to make a more compelling argument that we actually have access to these type of data that are collected. Or and it's about being able to differentiate what about us is different, right? Why are we so well positioned? How are they going to get a return on their investment? And also thinking about visualizing that data. Again, I think that the Pullman Police Department in their annual report has a lot of really great graphs, but we have to think through, how do we combine what we might think are kind of disparate data points to really make these compelling visualizations, thinking through logic models and really kind of building those early so that we have them available, so that we can kind of just plug and play as we're thinking about targeting different grant applications. One of the points that I just wanted to leave with the committee here is we have this kind of conundrum right now, which is almost all organizations now want evidence-based practice, right? And so you have this is what's very much concerning is that we stop innovating. And so one of the critiques around evidence-based practices is that the idea is that you have evidence that something works, you're building towards it, so you replicate, because that's the scientific method. It's all about replication, right? Replication, validation, keep doing it. Well, that means that it's more difficult to be able to argue something innovative, right? Like, we want to do this really innovative program. We want to create something for our local context that we believe this would work for us. There's not as much funding in it. Because if they don't have your unique context, then it's much more difficult for them to do. And I'll give you an example of an organization, a project I'm working on right now is a rural crisis intervention network. So we've studied crisis centers, right? There's research on that, but not rural crisis centers, right? Because they can't afford a traditional brick and mortar crisis center. They have to get creative. So you have all of these other areas that have these brick and mortar kind of official crisis centers, and you've got this rural community. It's like, we'd like funding to really evaluate our efficacy, but we're so different than everybody else because they had to be different. They couldn't replicate what had been, this kind of evidence-based practice on dealing with people in a crisis. They had to do something different, which meant it was actually more difficult for them to be able to target and identify funding. And that's slowly starting to change as people realize that it's about being able to argue why you're innovative, but building a blueprint for others that meet that kind of contextual kind of reality that mirrors you to some extent, that they could do that. And you're starting to see more applications that kind of move in that direction. But that's always been kind of the challenge as you've seen this kind of push towards really just replicating what others have done to see if it remains consistent. And that's not always possible, particularly given our context. And I think the chief could speak more on this as well. A lot of what ends up being provided as a best practice or a good practice is based on research that in no way mirrors the reality of the chief, right? And what the Pullman Police Department just doesn't look at their operational organizational framework. It's just not for them. It doesn't mean it won't work for them. It just means that often when he has to evaluate or he asks me to look at something and get some feedback on, it's often going, well, this is a really great idea, but it'd be very difficult for you to be able to implement given your resource constraints. And that's something that we, unfortunately, we have a pretty recurring conversation that might not be possible, but here's how we might be able to move forward. So by and large, I want to keep this really brief. As we identify grants, as we move forward, then we can start working through and maybe even do maybe a subcommittee for those that would really, that would be my recommendation, is that we do create a subcommittee that really is about writing grants. It's about thinking about the different elements that need to be written, thinking about people who have those sets that might be able to come together so we can return and meet those RFP requirements in the limited time that we get. So I mean, 1 month, sometimes you're only going to get, we get a maximum of 3 months head start on some of these. And, they're anywhere from 10-page submissions to 30 and 40-page submissions. So that's, I'll end that here.
Thank you, David. That was great. And I love your idea of putting together a subcommittee to work on this. I think this is great, especially with some of the priorities that will come up from the summit. We might want to look at, start learning about the grant writing from you and having that subcommittee to work on that and help the department out. So that'd be great.
I have some questions. I have a few. So I heard a couple of things, just really more points of clarification. I understand the way the process works. I don't understand the way the process works. I think I heard you say that we have to be locked and loaded so when the opportunity comes, we can pull the trigger, so to speak. The challenge with that, though, is it sounds like you're already collecting data for a topic that hasn't already been prioritized by that subcommittee. So did I hear that right?
Oh, no, that's an excellent question. I think it's really about baselining the data that the organization has so that we already have it. So if we need to know, for example, calls for service data, we can identify, over the last 10 years, officer-initiated contacts, dispatch-initiated contacts. So we already know what that data looks like. It's already accessible. We have charts built for it. So this way, if we decide to move forward on an application that would warrant that type of data, we can just copy that data, put it right in there, do a description of how many calls an officer takes in a given week. That's the type of data that I was talking about. So it's really baselining what the organization currently collects and has available to it. And this way, if we need to use any of that data in an application, we can just, it's plug and play.
But to me, it sounds like the grants that exist out there aren't necessarily geared to, sounds like the grants and the money that exists out there already have built in what they're looking for, and they're not really worried about what the community wants or needs. Am I saying that correctly?
No, I think that they change. I understand what you mean. They do change over time, and so you'll get different priorities that are out. Certainly right now, policing or providing services during COVID, right? You're seeing a lot more funding in that area. So that would be something like, does the Pullman Police Department, identify COVID-related contacts? Yes, they do. Would we be able to create an average number of contacts per week? Yes, we can. So it's really thinking through that as those priorities, and they do, they shift over time. We clearly understand what data is collected by any, let's just say the Pullman Police Department, and we know what that is, we know how it's collected, we can generate charts and describe the data, because that's a part that takes time, right? They need to understand, well, it'll vary, but generally speaking, do you have the data necessary to answer the research question that you propose? And we'd be able to say, absolutely yes.
So the Department of Justice, I imagine they probably send out an annual report. They say this is the new hot topic. I'm imagining. And so then the grants and the monies that follow are usually coming from some kind of annual report. Is that fair to say?
They do. So like, for example, the National Institute of Justice will get the large call in January, February, and we'll know what their priority areas of funding are. They tend to be pretty consistent, but you also have, specific targeted grants like violence against women. And so Chief Jenkins has participated in one of those grants with us. Years ago, you had the Smart Policing Initiative. That's how we had funds for the cameras at Adams Mall. So yeah, I think that they tend to be pretty consistent in terms of funding. The dollar amounts do vary as those budgets are released. But generally speaking, we have a fair familiarity with what's likely to be asked. For example, NIJ is very likely to ask about officer health and wellness because for the last 5 years, they've had grants on officer health and wellness. So we have consistency in that regard. Good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So David, I think we should propose that we create a subcommittee for those. Darby can send out an email to see if anyone is interested and then start working on that. That'd be great.
Yeah, once we have the priorities, I think we should be pretty quick. We have a really great group of members here. So I think we wouldn't have any problems filling. We might have too many people. I'm setting everyone up now, so this way Darby gets like 10 people. More people make less work. So I would prefer to have more people working to write this.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you. And thank you, Darby, for sending that email. All right, our next item is the police department update for Chief Jenkins.
All right, thank you. So last meeting I reported on our budget, which is a 2-year budget, 2021 and 2022, and it pretty much been set. Went through the process. Council did final approval, but during the process, council commented on the plan to maintain 3 police officer vacancies, and they would like to see those filled. So now the direction I've been given is to move forward to fill all of the vacancies. So we actually have a total of 4 now. 3 are the new positions that were never filled, and then 1 is an officer who moved to another state. So I now can start working to fill all those vacancies. We already had a recruitment in progress with lateral officers, and we're doing backgrounds on some lateral officers right now. And then we're also we have had a recruitment that's open. Last time I talked to the civil service examiner, she had almost 200 applications. So she's in the process now of going back and contacting those applicants because we have had some for a period of time. There'll be a number that have already gotten hired somewhere else or have changed their direction or whatever reason. But anyway, we did have applications. So we'll look at probably having some interviews in January. Public safety testing, who does our pre-employment initial testing where police officer applicants can take a written test and a physical abilities test, and then departments that work with public safety testing, they can actually apply directly through public safety testing to those agencies. And so we receive applications that way. Public safety testing had an online virtual career fair with applicants that were interested in working in Washington State. And so myself and officers Patrick and Tiana with regard to our nuisance party enforcement and enforcing that ordinance, where essentially we're holding hosts responsible for what goes on at the parties they host, and if they host a party that has activity that violates the proclamation requirements, then we can issue them a civil infraction. So we've issued about, I think, 44 of those total since August. The last one we issued was on November 6th, and we've only issued 2 since November 1st. So I think there's a lot of things going on. A lot of students have left town. That's one of the things. Another one is I think we have really good compliance overall. And then another one is I think there's a learning curve. The students started to figure out how to hold a party without having all of those things.
Chief, I think is it just me or is his audio choppy and going in and out? Is that
Let me
everybody?
turn off.
Oh, no,
my-
absolutely.
All right, I'm going to turn off my net motion here. Is this sounding better?
Yes.
Okay. So I attend 3 or 4 meetings each week with various partners in the community regarding COVID-19, mostly our healthcare organizations, and as of course Whitman County Department of Health and the hospital. So Whitman County Department of Health has been working with State Department of Health on vaccine deployment plans. Washington State University is a player in that as a state organization, as well as having the ability to store zero vaccine. We just started getting information today about the initial deployment of what they call Tier 1A, which are frontline healthcare providers and first responders who likely come into contact with people who might have COVID-19. So they're putting together a plan to start issuing vaccinations to those people, as well as congregate living locations where there are long-term care facilities, and deploy the vaccines there as well. So that's probably going to start happening this week. Part of our contract with Axon, which they provide our body cameras and in-car cameras, we also get from them tasers. They used to be called Taser International, now they're Axon. They just upgraded their tasers to a new model that we just deployed. All of our staff and all our staff went through training on the new taser, which is a much more versatile, less lethal device. And, in my opinion, tasers has been a device that saved probably more lives than any other non-lethal device that police have received. So it's an excellent, less lethal option for law enforcement. The Washington Association Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Association usually has a 3-day conference in fall. Because of COVID-19, they went to a virtual 2-day conference this year, and that was held a couple of weeks ago. And I think that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Chief Jenkins. Are there any questions for the chief? All right, we will move to our constituencies poll. So in lieu of going around our virtual room, is there anybody who wished to report on their constituency?
Is the Black Faculty, or not Black Faculty Staff Association, that's me, Black Leaders of Transcendence and Influence on, and do they want to introduce themselves?
Oh yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm at work. My name is Cameron. I'm the president of the Black Leaders of Transcendence and Influence. It's the organization that I started back in September with just a couple of friends. Pretty much the purpose of our organization is to pretty much spread Black awareness and to allow for equal opportunity for all students within the Pullman community to build a better sense of community here. Especially with COVID going on and we can't go to meetings in public and do certain events and stuff like that. Something that we're also working on is trying to build volunteer opportunities for students while in COVID, especially being that some jobs or some applications that they might go into for internships need those, and also just pretty much allowing students to come together during this time.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, welcome to our group.
Thank you.
Any other reports?
This doesn't really have to do with my constituency, but I've just been noticing at the corner of Friel and Larry that the vegetation there is starting to, well, you know, it keeps growing, it's a slow process, but it's sort of blocking visibility some. Larry is, I mean, you're coming down Friel, you got to stop sign there. But seeing up the streets getting a little, I think it's the kind of thing, I think if the vegetation was actually pushed back to the edge of the sidewalk like it's supposed to be, it'd be just fine, but anyway.
Is my audio working? We'll have our code enforcement go and check that out, Eric.
Anybody else? All right, do we have any public comment at this time? All right, well, our next meeting will be held on January 11th. Our subcommittee for the summit, I will get that scheduled. Darby will send out an email to see if who is all in favor to join Dr. Macon's subcommittee for grant writing. Not sure if that's what you want to call it, but that's what I'm going to call it at the moment. Yes, Eric.
Quick question. Do we have an order of business that we skipped at the beginning that needs to be attended to since we have quorum?
Oh, our minutes. Thank you, Eric. So did everybody read the minutes, and is there any revisions to the minutes? Do we have a motion to approve?
I did not read them yet. Should I read them?
You're excused this time, Rocky.
Okay, good.
But we do have the next meeting, though. We do have a quiz for the new person. So just wait until January.
Motion.
All right. So we have a motion and second. So all in favor to approve the minutes? Any opposed? Wonderful. That passes. Thank you, Eric, for that reminder. All right. So January 11th, our next meeting. Have a wonderful and safe holiday and Happy New Year, and toast 2020 to our past. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
holidays.
Bye.